DNA test horror stories. Updated, today I messed up by destroying the entirety of my family for only $99. We've all been seeing the recent craze of DNA testing and whatnot, so my dad and I decided to jump in the bandwagon and we bought 2 from 23andMe. We got our results back a few days ago and I went into the DNA relatives section to check out my matches. At the top, it listed my dad as only sharing 29.2% DNA with me and being predicted to be a half-brother, which is impossible. This didn't make sense to me since we also shared a paternal haplogroup and we just look so alike, so he was definitely my father. My cousin also had taken the test a while back and she shared 24.6% with me, also predicted to be my half-sibling. We're supposed to share around 12%, being first cousins. I couldn't think of a genetic relationship that would explain what I was seeing and I had doubts in the accuracy of the percentages, so I made a on r/23and, asking for help. Basically, the shared percentages are extremely accurate and highly unlikely to be false. The only realistic explanation for what I was seeing was that my uncle, my cousin's father and my dad's brother, is my father. Reality hit me in the face like a flying bag of bricks. All the dots lined up and I felt a sense of loss. I sat in my room for an hour just in shock and then I had a feeling of anger come over me. I needed some freaking answers. Without even thinking, I rushed out of my room and confronted my mother downstairs. My mom is a businesswoman and is often away on business trips. She had no idea my dad and I had done one of these tests since she was away on a trip, and just got back. My mother and I never had a traditional relationship. She was always focused on her work and my dad ended up mostly raising me. My irrational self didn't even sugarcoat it. I asked her if she cheated on dad with Uncle David, name changed for obvious reasons. I have never seen the color drain from someone's face so quickly. She looked dumbfounded and then mumbled, "What kind of question is this? Of course not." I told her everything, the test, percentages, DNA matches, all of it. Crap hit the fan. My mom fell to the ground crying, begging me not to tell dad. I left her there and went back into my room. I called my cousin, now half-sibling, and told her everything. She ended the call screaming, "Dad, now uncle," then came home and stumbled into my room asking what's wrong with mom. I told him everything too. He didn't say anything after calming down. He left the room and I locked the door. For the next few hours, I heard my entire family fall apart outside my door. My parents got into a heated argument and my grandparents rushed over to see what was going on. My aunt-in-law and David showed up shortly later and I'm pretty sure I heard my dad and David get into some physical fight. Utter chaos. I feel like freaking crap. I know it's not my fault, but I can't help feeling that this is all because of me. If I had spent my freaking birthday money on something else, none of this would have happened, but another part of me is glad to know the truth. I'm too scared to go outside. I don't even know what the outcome was. The only noise I hear in the house now is the occasional sobbing coming from my mother, and I'm sure my dad is out of the house. Screw my life. Now for the top comments before reading the update. Call your dad, make it clear you still see him as your father. Could really help him out. I'd say the dad is the main victim here, with the double betrayal and the fact that his offspring is not truly his. That probably shakes something deeply engraved by our evolution. As for OP, I totally understand your anger over the lie, but consider the messed up fact that you wouldn't exist if it hadn't happened. Yeah, his brother slept with his wife and made his son, and lied about it for 19 years. Not sure that I could ever forgive either of them. The kid you raised is your son so you make it work with him, but the wife clearly knew. I'd have to talk to the brother and see if he knew. Is it wrong to ask for an update? Very curious how everything turns out. Your dad realizing his isn't your dad but your uncle, grandparents now involved, it's all such a weird situation. Your dad realizing his isn't your dad but your uncle. And your uncle realizing his isn't your uncle but your dad. That one is still questionable. He probably knew. The only person at fault is your mother and uncle. She and him are the ones who cheated and lied. You don't need to feel guilty about exposing their guilt. Also, your real dad is the guy who raised you, not the guy whose genes are more similar. He may have been your father boy, but he ain't your daddy. And now for the update. Back to where we were. I eventually left my room, called my dad and he was actually at the hospital with my grandmother. She couldn't handle the situation and had a heart attack right when she went home. I knew my mother was still in the house, but I left her there, again, without saying a word and went to the hospital. I got to the hospital, saw my grandmother, She's in stable condition, and then sat down with my dad to talk. First thing we told each other was that this situation didn't change our relationship. He was still my father and I was still his son. I got the confirmation of my dad and David getting into some altercation. Dad told me he messed him up really hard. My mother had told my dad that she was drunk and David forced her. The only reason she had not told anyone was out of fear of destroying my father's family. Dad then suggested going to the police. She refused, and then started to slightly change her story, making my dad doubt her claim. That's when David and everyone else came over. David claimed my mother was lying to save her own butt, and that they had consensual intercourse. As of now, my dad and I have no idea who to believe. He says his relationships with my mother and David had always been good. He's not sure what to do. David's wife is filing for divorce since this occurred after they were married. My cousin is holding up all right, although she's still pretty shaken up. My dad and I have been staying with my grandparents for the past week until we figure out what to do. Any advice would help. Thank you. Sorry if this sounds rushed. I typed this on my way to class. Now for some top advice. I hope you and your dad can get through this fine. I wish you guys the best of luck and stay strong. And Grandma. OP, you didn't do anything wrong. These tests are not your fault. People are no longer allowed to get away with no consequences for their actions, even when those actions were long ago. I'm sorry this happened to you. I can't imagine what you're feeling over what happened in the past or how it will affect the future. What none of us wants is for you to place and accept the blame for actions you did not initiate. The people responsible need to accept that blame and responsibility. Extend yourself some grace. You deserve it. And cousin and aunt. Even they didn't do anything wrong. It affected them as much as it affected OP and his dad. As cliché as it sounds, therapy is probably a good idea for you and your dad. This is a pretty heavy situation to digest. The fact that you and your dad have already established that you don't want this to change your relationship is a really positive sign. He is your dad and you are his son, despite what a DNA test says. Obviously, it's up to you guys to decide how to proceed with your mom and your uncle. I think your mom needs to be completely honest about her relationship with David, if she wants any chance at reconciliation. At the very least, she owes everyone the truth. Therapy is almost never a bad thing. My wife and I go just for maintenance. Hey man, thanks for the update. First off, I think you are awesome for supporting your dad. That's some messed up stuff you are dealing with, so it's good to have someone who is with you all the way, both of you. I'm really sorry to hear about your grandmother, but it is good she is recovering. I am enraged by your mom. Unless she actually got forced, claiming to have been is really mess up. And since she changed her story when your dad wanted to report it, this feels like she is just trying to save her own butt like your uncle says. Your dad will need a lawyer for divorce. And as another person has pointed out, you should both think about seeing a therapist about this. They will be able to help you protect yourself from further harm. If I was in your place, I would also not speak to my mom and uncle for now. They seem only concerned about themselves and will likely try to manipulate you in some way. I wish you and your family, whoever you still want to be part of it, all the best going forward. Good luck. I am enraged by your mom. Unless she actually got forced, claiming to have been is really messed up. Same. Reprehensible thing to do. Now for the next story. Updated, today I messed up by getting a DNA test and revealing a family secret. I've always been interested in doing one of those at-home kits that tell you your ethnicity estimates. My mother has, for many years, claimed that her own great-grandmother was completely Native American, and I recently learned that this is apparently something common for Southerners to claim, but that it is rarely true. I finally went ahead and bought one of the kits, because there is nothing I enjoy more in life than proving my mother wrong. Fast forward a few weeks. I get my results. I am 0% Native American, which isn't exactly shocking. The real surprise comes from the fact that I am also 0% Eastern European. This probably wouldn't mean much for most people, but I happen to be Polish. Or at least, I thought I was. I have an unpronounceable, very Polish last name. My great-grandparents were Polish-speaking immigrants. My paternal grandfather himself spoke Polish as a child. My first thought was that the test was a mistake. My results came over a week before the projected arrival date, and I knew I should be somewhere around 25% Polish/Eastern European. So maybe there had been an error somewhere at the lab. I started digging around through my DNA relative matches. I had matched with an extended cousin with my mom's maiden name, living in the state that she grew up in. So, the DNA analyzed was definitely mine, and this was not a switch tube situation. There were only two possible explanations: either my own dad was not my biological father, or my Polish grandfather was not the biological father of my dad. I look a lot like my father, so it seemed unlikely that we were not related. However, there was no strong family resemblance between my dad and his own father. In fact, my grandfather and many of his siblings had we'll call it, striking nose that my sister and I had often rejoiced in not inheriting. Also, my paternal grandparents had a disastrous marriage and bitter divorce. An affair did not seem out of the question. My paternal grandfather died over 10 years ago, but my paternal grandmother is still living and I gave her a call. It took a while for me to fully explain the DNA testing to her. She's 87, but we got there. She denied it and tried to explain the unexpected results with a long ramble about migrating European tribes before I was finally able to make her understand that I would be able to test relatives from the Polish side of the family, and determine whether or not I was actually related to them. She told me that she didn't think that was a good idea, and I should think about it before contacting anyone. I think I knew right then, but it was not until today, 2 days later, that she finally admitted it to my sister. My father had been lied to his entire life about his biological father. So, who is my actual paternal grandfather? To be determined. My grandmother promised my sister that she will tell the two of everything when my sister gets into town for Christmas. She requested that we not tell anyone until then. It's too late, my sister already told everyone. Now for the top comments before reading the update. I think a lot of people would be astonished to see their true genetic family tree overlaid on their historical one. I found out I was a doorstep baby, and the lies running through the generations before ours are mind-boggling. I just got a DNA test. I had the choice of making my results private or public. There was a warning that if you make the results public, you might discover previously unknown relatives. On my father's deathbed, found out my paternal grandmother beat my toddler aunt to death with a fire poker in a fit of postpartum depression, so that was fun. Oh God. I feel like I should say something. I'm a high school science teacher, and about 15 years ago, I spent a year teaching science in Bogota, Colombia at a private school. Rich kids, raised in Spanish and English. Great kids in fact. I was teaching genetics with one group and we were looking at blood types. Unlike North America, identification in Colombia includes blood type. Seriously, this is a great idea for emergency situations. No idea why it isn't here. So it's common for people to know the blood types of their entire family. We did blood tests in class and the students were able to see that it matched up with their ID info. We then used this info with their family's blood types to look at pedigrees. One of the girls in the class came up to me after class with a concern. I don't remember the exact blood types, but her parents' blood types didn't fit. Basically, there was no way her dad was her dad. I fumbled through some BS possibility of a mutation, but I learned my lesson. Never again will I have students do blood type pedigrees with their families. This literally happened to an old science teacher named Mr. Wolf from our school. He did it in the 90s and accidentally outed an adopted girl who didn't know her parents weren't biologically her parents. He never did the finger prick tests for blood types again. And now for the update. In my previous post, I said that my grandmother promised to tell all when my sister comes to town next week. Officially, that is still the plan, but my sister, who apparently missed her calling as a special prosecutor, got my grandmother to admit to her over the phone the story of what actually happened. And it is interesting. Without going too much into my family history, when I first noticed the inconsistencies in my DNA test, I had an early idea who might be my bio-paternal grandfather. Basically, my grandmother had a long-time family friend that she had known even before my grandfather. PG, to try and distinguish between the two men, I am going to refer to them as PG for Polish grandpa, and BG for bio-grandpa. She and this friend maintained contact for years and years, all the way until both of their spouses had died and they married each other. Their kids had grown up together even before they become step-siblings as adults, and they are still part of my extended family as aunts and uncles even though BG died when I was a baby, almost 30 years ago. Over the years, there has been a bit of mild speculation that BG had possibly fathered my dad's younger brother. No one really took it all that seriously, but he did look an awful lot like one of BG's and his wife's kids. Because of this, the day I got my test results and figured out what they probably meant, I called my sister and we ordered a test for her best friend, one of Berg's grandchildren. Telling this information to Grandma was what finally made her admit it. I was going to be matched as a cousin with my sister's best friend, who, although considered a part of my extended family, should have been of no biological relation to me. But here's where it gets a little confusing. My grandmother claims that PG was sterile as the result of something that happened to him in World War II. She says all 3 of her children are biologically from BG, but that it was all done intentionally through artificial insemination. She desperately wants this to be kept a secret from everyone, including my dad and his siblings, because she is worried that people will assume the worst about her. My dad and his siblings were born in the early 1950s. Does anyone know what the odds of this were? How common was artificial insemination back then? Would someone have really used a friend as a donor? More than 3 separate times, my grandmother had at least one miscarriage that I remember her telling me about at some point. My grandmother has a known history of rewriting events in her favor. I guess it really does not matter at this point why BG was the father, but it is frustrating to feel like she might just be throwing in more lies on top of everything. Answers to common questions from my last post. A lot of people wanted to know which DNA test I used. I used MyHeritage, but I have no idea if it is better than any of the others. I picked it because it was cheapest. A lot of people also wanted to tell me that these tests are not very accurate. I don't really know what to say about that except that it was accurate enough to know that I did not have any Polish ancestry. Some people wanted to know how my dad was taking all of this. He has not yet been told who his bio father was, but he did not have a particularly strong reaction to the original information. His opinion was that it did not particularly matter to him because whoever it was dead anyway. My dad is not one to dwell on this type of thing. My mother thinks my sister and I are being ridiculous for obsessing over the whole thing, but this is the same mother that still refuses to admit that she does not have any recent Native American ancestry, so. Now for the top comments. Your grandma is obviously trying to save face, whether she cheated without him knowing, or had BG's baby some other way. The fact they were later married makes me suspect they were in love all those years but didn't believe in divorce or something. Hopefully more answers will spill when your sister arrives. I'd be persistent but non-judgmental if you really want to tease out the truth. Artificial insemination back then was a turkey baster. DIY. Everyone should do grandma a favor and accept her explanation. PG isn't alive to be heard or tell his side of the story. Maybe he was sterile and there was some wife swapping. You should try to smooth this over with grandma or just drop it. OP's father and his siblings have a right to know who their biological father was even if he is dead along with the man who raised them as his own. If grandma wants to claim it was a sperm donor, let her make that claim and just accept it. There's nothing to gain by calling her a liar. Her kids have a right to know but let her keep her dignity even if her story does seem like BS. The artificial insemination piece is just face-saving. The actual equivalent of, but I didn't inhale. But other comments are right, it doesn't matter, and you should probably just drop it because it appears to embarrass your grandmother. It can be pretty important to know your family history, as then if someone gets some disease you may want to get checked for it too if it's hereditary or if they get some sort of cancer. Take extra precautions around stuff that may increase your risk of that cancer. Totally understandable wanting people to know who their grandfather actually was. And that's it for this video guys. If you have thoughts to share, leave a comment below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you like this content. I'll catch you in the next one. Good day everyone.